So this question says, if possible, determine the inverse of the following. Also find the domain and range of any inverse. The first function I have is f of x equals 9 minus x squared. Let's look at the graph. F of x equals 9 minus x squared. And what do we know? Is this a function? Yes. It passes the vertical line test, but it's not one-to-one. If I look at a horizontal line like y equals 6, we notice it cuts the graph in more than one point. If that happens, it is not a one-to-one function. So this function here, not one-to-one. So what's our conclusion? It does not have an inverse. Now the second function, let's take a look at it. That's g of x is x squared plus 4 for when x is greater than or equal to 0. Go back to Desmos. Get rid of this. This time g of x equals x squared plus 4, but it's only true when x is greater than or equal to 0. So is this a function? It certainly passes the vertical line test. How about the horizontal line test? If I draw a horizontal line like y equals 7, does it cut the graph in more than one point? No. So therefore, it is one-to-one. Any horizontal line you use, right, only cuts the graph in one point. So therefore, it is one-to-one. So we can say this function is one-to-one. So it has an inverse. But before we compute that, let's go back and look at the graph one more time. And what did we call it? We called it g of x. So what's the domain of g and what's the range of g? You'll notice x is greater than or equal to 4. So the point 0, 4 is actually on the graph. That's a solid dot. You see that? So what is my domain? What's the lowest x value you see? Domain here, I do not see an x value of -1 or -2. The lowest x value I see is 0, but I see 1 and I see 2. And if I go long enough, I would see 3. I would see 3, I'd see 4, I'd see 5. I mean, it goes beyond. It goes as high as you want it to go. There's 3 at 313, thereabout, right? You know, 4 shows up somewhere. Where's 4? 4 is about here. And the x's go as far as you want. So the domain, the lowest x value you see is 0. And the highest x value you see, well, you can't see as high as it goes. So domain from 0 to infinity, but it includes 0. 0 is there, x greater than or equal to 0, so it includes 0. So the domain of g, 0 less equal x less infinity. So square bracket 0 to plus infinity. Less than infinity doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it might help visualize that interval notation. But if you feel better to scratch that, 0 less equal to x, x is greater than or equal to 0. All right, how about the range of g? What do we have for the range of g? What's the lowest y value you see? You don't see 3, you don't see 2, you don't see 1. The lowest y value you see is 4, but they're growing as far as you want them to grow. So the range here is from 4 to infinity. So keep those in mind for g. We haven't determined the inverse yet, but we will. But we have the domain and range of g. So now we want to find g inverse. So let's remember what we were saying here. G of x is x squared plus 4 for x bigger than or equal to 0. Then what am I going to say? What am I going to say? Y equals x squared plus 4 for x bigger than or equal to 0. And then we know to do an inverse, x becomes y and y becomes x, and we have to solve for y. So x becomes y, y becomes x. And I want to solve for y. So how am I going to do that? I have x is y squared plus 4. Let's subtract 4 from both sides. X minus 4 is y squared. Take the square root of both sides. Normally speaking, you would say plus or minus, except notice x becomes y, y becomes x. Y is bigger than or equal to 0, so I don't need the plus or minus. The square root of y squared will just be plus the square root of x minus 4. So y is going to equal the square root of x minus 4. That is the inverse of your function. That is g inverse of x is the square root of x minus 4. Now remember from our previous page, the domain of g was from 0 to infinity. The range of g was from 4 to infinity. So over here for g inverse, the range of g has got to be the domain of g inverse. Again, x becomes y, y becomes x. Range becomes domain. So the domain of g inverse will be 4 to infinity, which should seem reasonable. If you choose something less than 4, you've got the square root of a negative number. That's a problem. And the domain of g becomes the range of g inverse. Which is from 0 to infinity. No surprise, I said y had to be greater than or equal to 0 once we had x becomes y, y becomes x. So let's look at the graph of that g inverse is the square root of x minus 4. Remember, there's our g. Our g inverse, which I'm going to just call h, is the square root of x minus 4. Do you believe that it is a mirror image through the line y equals x? I would say so. 4, 0, 0, 4. Right, 8, 2, 2, 8. You can see that. How about the domain? We said the domain of g inverse was 4 to infinity. That seems right, yes. No x value is less than 4. Domain of g inverse, green, 4 to infinity. Range, we said the range was 0 to infinity. That's what it looks like. It looks like this gets all the way down to 4, 0. I can label that point if you like. So the function goes all the way down to 4. And that's the lowest y value I see, and then that grows to infinity. So indeed, domain of g inverse square bracket 4 to infinity, range of g inverse square bracket 0 to infinity.